My name is Iqbal Gariwal. I am a technical support manager here at CADpoint. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, top 10 tips for Autodesk AEC collection, creating custom families with Revit. So to give you some of our background, CADpoint is based in Crowthorne, Berkshire, and we are a gold partner with Autodesk. We have a team of experts to assist all aspects of design. We're also partners with some of the most trusted hardware manufacturers in the industry, including HP, NVIDIA, etc. As well as selling software, our team can also offer introductory training for new customers and advanced courses for experienced customers to help you get more from your software. I'm now going to pass you on to our technical consultant, Jonathan, who will be speaking to you today. Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Iqbal. So just to introduce myself, I'm a technical consultant and I look after BIM training and consultancy. About 15 years in the architectural industry, a master's degree in BIM management. I've worked as a BIM manager in various architectural practices, from small to medium and larger. Qualified as architectural technologist, and I speak at various BIM events in the UK and Ireland as well. In this video, we want to show you how to get started with Revit families, and we're going to give you 10 top tips on how to get started. So first off, to define a Revit family is an object that exists within your Revit environment. So for example, windows, doors, tables, furniture, these are all families or objects as they're known, but in a Revit context they're known as families, and this is a different type of file. So a Revit project file is RVT, and a Revit family file is an RFA file. So RFA standing for Revit family. These are just slightly different file formats, just because we can create custom families and then import them into our projects and reuse them in different projects. So this could be furniture or a certain type of window, or the appearance of how information is viewed in a 2D or controlled in visibility graphics as well. So it allows us to maximize what we create and reproduce it or reuse it in a number of different projects. So one of the first tips I'm going to get started on is exploring other families. The reason I give this as a tip is because it helps you understand how a family is created, and looking at simpler families and then even looking at more complex families and how they actually function. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to click into this table, for example, and we can see here when I select it, it tells me what category it is, that it's a furniture category, and here it gives me an option to edit family. So this just allows me to open up that particular family and to explore it, and just to understand the makeup of it, the geometry of it, and the constraints within it as well. And this just allows you to inform you about different families that you might want to create for your projects as well. So as we can see here, we've got a slightly different user interface. We've got some create tools, insert, and slightly less tools than you'd have in your Revit project. And I can see up here that it's a .rfa file in the top toolbar there. And we can see here that it's only the object that exists, and it's a series of different pieces of geometry. So I can see that I can actually select the under support element of that particular table. I can select the tabletop as a piece of geometry as well, and I can edit these if I wish. And I can see the legs are created just as extrusions as well, and all the different elements of that as well. So different tables and different family objects have different constraints as they're known. So if I go back into my Revit project here and just go back into, click on this table again, I just want to look at the constraints in a Revit context. So I'm just going to click edit type on this, and this is going to bring up certain parameters. So we've got the width, we've got the length, and we've got the height. And we can say similar parameters exist if I select a different family. So for example, if I select a window, all of these properties here on the left hand side are also parameters within the family, and then I also have type parameters within this. So for a window, you've got frame depth, you've got your frame width and your frame height, and different types of parameters. So every family contains a certain amount of parameters, and they do vary obviously from object. You're going to have different objects that exist in a different context, whether that's something that's based on a floor, a piece of furniture, or something that's hosted in a wall, either a window or a door, for example. They'll all have different parameters, and planning your Revit families is about understanding what parameters you need to create as part of your Revit family. So if I want to say, for example, explore this particular window, I go into Edit Family. That will open the RFA file for that family. So here I have it open in the background. I just go into Window, and this is a separate, again, an RFA file, and this is a single window, and I can see the different elements within this as well. If I go into something called the reference level, or the floor plan view, this just shows me the different types of windows. And I can see we've got lots of different green lines here, types of dimensions, which can look quite complex, but it does make sense. And this is what controls our parameters within our project. So we've got our width. So this is controllable. And I know it's controllable because it says width equals a dimension. That means that within the Revit project, then the width is controllable. That can become 2 meters, 3 meters, or 500 millimeters. And the same for the frame depth. And any of these type of dimensions that you see are parameters that are controlled, and I know that because I can see under label that the labels are named accordingly to the parameters that are controllable within your Revit project. The second tip I'm going to give is about understanding your Revit categories. And the purpose of this is because when you go to create a Revit family from new or from scratch, you're given a series of different templates. So just on the left hand side here, if I go out to families, we can see that we've got all these different categories, which you may or may not be familiar with. We've got casework, which is obviously for fitted furniture and kitchen equipment, as we know. We've got doors, windows, generic models, any type of furniture. So these are your Revit categories, and within these different categories, obviously we've got different objects or different families, and then within the families we've got different types. So these are your types, and then this is your actual family here at the top level. So the purpose to understand your Revit categories is that when you go to create a new family, so if I go to new, I want to create a new family, it presents you with a series of templates. So these are RFT files, and I can see in my thumbnail here on the right hand side, it's showing me some sort of information is already in that particular file. This particular one is for a curtain wall. If I wanted to create a door, for example, I'd use the door template, and the same for a window. Same for a window down the bottom here, our plumbing fixtures, parking equipment, or even for lighting. Or there is a generic model one, which is just to create something that doesn't necessarily have a defined category to it. So if I open up the door one, for example, so just by opening up the door one, we'll see the different features of this particular template. So this template has a host wall built into it. So this particular wall actually doesn't load into your project. This template is predefined that it knows that this window that you create in here needs to be hosted in the wall. Therefore, in the Revit template file, the wall is there. But once you create your window in this environment, it will not load into your particular project. So we can see here, just in this 3D view of this pre-modeled window, only the window will load into your particular project. So it's good to understand what template you need to get started with as well. So what's quite important is to plan out your family before you actually create any geometry or even start a Revit template file. So what we're going to do in this is we're going to create a fairly basic table, and we're just going to give it a number of parameters. So we can see here on the left hand side, we've got a very basic paper sketch of a tabletop in plan view at the very top, and on the bottom we've got some sort of elevation just showing the tabletop and the height of the legs perhaps. So within this particular family, we know we want to be able to create some sort of tabletop. We want to be able to give it a length and a width, and we want to be able to control that length and the width. And the way we'll do that is by using reference planes and constraints. So we'll create a constraint or a parameter called length, and we'll create one called width. So this just means that you can flexibly use your table. Either it can be any size in any project that you assign those particular parameters too. And we want to be able to control the thickness of the actual tabletop as well. If it's timber or concrete or metal, we'd be able to control it from any dimension, 100 mil, 50 mil, 25 mil. And then we're going to have 4 legs, and they'll always be placed within the table, and they'll always be at a fixed distance for this particular family. And the table leg thickness will always be the same as well, but they'll always move as the table moves. So that's kind of the key thing when you're sketching it out. And then we'll be able to control the actual height of the tabletop as well, and we'll make sure that all of the legs move. As the table height moves, we want the legs to move up with it as well. So we want those particular pieces of geometry to be attached to that piece of geometry. So to think of it in that sense, and to think of the movement of the different elements within your Revit family. So the different elements of geometry, the different extrusions, or the different tabletops or the different table legs. To think of it that way, whether it's a window or a table or a door. To think of those sort of complexities and intricacies as well. If we were to plan out a window, for example, we might create some sort of crude sketch like we see here, and we can see an elevation of a window in the top, and it's fairly basic. We've got a window oak, we've got a wall, and we've got a thickness of what the particular window frame will be. And within that particular window frame, we've got glass, which will be a material, but that will also have a thickness, whether it's 4 mil, 5 mil, or if it's double glazed. If we choose to model it as double glazing, you may not need to. It's more about the appearance, and then obviously we'll have a height and a width to that particular window as well. And then in plan view, we can see at the bottom, to understand how those dimensions or parameters are going to translate into your Revit object as well. In terms of the width and the different thicknesses, we can see the glass is going to sit between the frame. We can see that the frame is going to have a certain offset from the inside and the outside of the wall. And we can see that the window frame itself is going to have a thickness. It's also going to have a material applied to it as well. So obviously glass, or it could be frosted, or some sort of opaque material applied to it as well. And we want to be able to control these as parameters as well. So that's just another way of thinking about a Revit family, in this case a window. But we're going to actually create a table to show you a fairly basic family, but to show you the principles that we've discussed here today. So we can see here, this is an example of the finished table that we're going to create. And we can see we've got a tabletop and we've got 4 legs, fairly basic, but we can control all of those dimensions from the height, the thickness, and the width of the table as well. And the legs will always follow the outside of the table, so they won't move. They won't stay in a single place. They'll always move as you resize your table, which is what we want. So to recreate this, we're just going to go into File, going to go to New, create a family, and we're just going to choose the furniture object, furniture template here. Just going to click Open. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at these. So these are your reference planes. So these are already in your default templates for furniture, and these are just your center lines essentially. So you can imagine this is the center of your object, and we're just going to leave these in place. We can see here we're in a plan view, or it's also called reference level. So we're in a plan view, and we're going to just start placing some reference planes. So we're just going to go into Create. Just going to go to reference plane, and all I'm doing here is creating, I suppose, the extents of where my table is going to exist. So reference plane there. I want to create another one down the other end, and along the bottom as well. So all I've done here, you can see, is it basically just forms a rectangle of where my table is going to exist. So the next thing I'm going to do then is I'm just going to go into the side elevation. I'm going to also place some reference lines there as well for the tabletop. So I'm just going to go into the left, and I'm going to go Create again. So this is just going to create a reference plane for the tabletop, sorry, reference plane. Pull that across. We're also going to create one for the table thickness as well. So this is not the geometry. These are just reference planes that we're creating, and this is what we will attach our constraints and our geometry to as well. So I'm just going to go back into my reference level, and I'm just going to place what we call constraints, and these will become your parameters within your object, and this is how you change the width and the length of the table. So I'm just going to take a dimension line, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to place it on each of these external. just going to change my project units in this to millimeters. So make sure we're working in a metric system. Click OK, that's fine. So we can see here I've placed a dimension and it just says 1974. But when I want to control this as the width of the table, so I'm going to go up to label. You can see there's nothing in here. I'm just going to hit this. I'm going to click that to create a parameter. I'm going to call this table width type parameter and just click OK. If you make it an instance parameter, obviously then you can change it as an instance parameter. So it will only affect that particular individual table rather than all of the type of that particular table if you load it into your Revit project. So I'm going to click OK on that. I'm going to do the same for table length. Again, click that. I'm going to create another parameter. I'm going to call this table length. Table length. And what I'm also going to do is use, I want always the table to expand or change size from the center of the particular table. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit EQ on that. That means that this line and this line will always be equal distance from the center line, and the same for these two reference planes as well. So you can ignore what the dimensions are just when I click on that and hit EQ. Then it will always update to that particular size. So I'm just going to move these out of my way here for a moment. Those dimensions lines. Then I'm going to go into my elevation view where I placed my elevation lines. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a thickness on this. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create this. I'm going to call this table thickness. So you can see I actually locked it there. What you can do is lock this particular dimension so that it always stays the same. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it that we can edit it. But I could lock it if you always wanted to remain the same. And also what I want to do is change the table height as well. So I'm just going to tab into my my reference plane at the bottom of this. So pull that across. I'm just going to call this my table height. So create another parameter. Call this table height. Okay. So that's setting up your constraints. So we've got our thickness, we've got our height, and we've got our length and our width as well. So the next thing we want to start doing is actually creating our geometry within this. So I'm going to go into my reference level. I'm just going to go to create, and we're just going to create an extrusion. So I'm going to create my tabletop here. What I'm going to do is just create my sketch lines within the inside of my reference planes, and then I'm going to use my align tool. I'm going to click on those, and I'm going to lock them every time I align them. And the reason for this is because we always want our table edges to move with our geometry as well. And then I'm going to finish that. Then I'm going into my elevation view. So then I'm going to do the same in elevation view with this. I'm going to lock that to that, lock it to that, make sure that is locked. And then I'm going to create my 4 legs within here as well. So I'm going to go back into my plan view. I'm going to create another extrusion. So I'm just going to place these like so. Create that extrusion. So what I'm going to do here is again use my dimensions lines to the outside of my table. And I'm actually just going to lock these dimensions. And that means that they'll always be 131 and 137 out from those tables as well. And then I'm going to mirror these 4 legs and parameters as well. And you see we've got 4 legs. So I'm just going to go back into my left side here. And now I want to attach the legs to the end of my table. So I want to make sure that my legs are always moving with my table. So in this case, I'm just going to attach them to the end of the geometry. So I'll have to do it 4 times for those legs. And I'm going to lock them every time. And I can see here I've actually got my other legs in the far end. And I'm going to lock that again. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to test my family, or I'm going to flex my dimensions as it's also known. I just want to make sure that the parameters or the constraints that I've applied are going to work when I bring it into Revit. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to open up family types, I can see these are all the constraints or the parameters that I created. So table height, if I change this to say 600, hit apply on that, I can see everything drops down with it. If I change the length to say 900, everything moves. So that was the other width. And then if I change the table width also to 900 and apply, that's moved. All the lines have moved with it. I'm comfortable now that my geometry is properly attached. So if I go into my 3D view then, and again, just to open up my parameters, I'm just going to change the table length 1500, apply, perfect. And I'm just going to change this to 750, hit apply, perfect. We can see everything moves with it, and the legs move every time as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to load this into my project. So I'm going to load this into my sample file project, click OK. So it asked me to save the project if I want. I'm just going to ignore that for a second. That's just my Revit project. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to go into a floor plan here. I'm going to go into my kitchen floor plan. I'm just going to place my object that I've just loaded. So it's now loaded into the project. So that means it's in my, I can select it from my family categories, or I can simply just type in CM for component, and it's going to bring up obviously whatever the last one was. So I'm just going to place a table here. So now I'm going to jump into a 3D view so I just want to see how that looks in a 3D view. So you can see it there. It's placed down there. I'm just going to turn on my color here. I can see it's placed there. So I'm just going to again flex that within here, and I can see these parameters have now imported as well from the ones that we had seen within the Revit family editor. So that's, I'm going to change this to 800 for example and make sure it works. That's the height, perfect. Everything is moved with it. Change the width to 1200, hit apply, perfect. Everything is. What I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to rename this. So I want to call it what the size of the table is. So I'm going to call it, I want to name it 800 by 1500 by 1200. So that's my table top, my table type. So I want to create another table type, and I want to make it a different size. So I want it to be a coffee table. In this instance, I'm just going to call it coffee table. I'm going to make it 600 by 600. So that's duplicated that. So we can see I have two types in here now. I could duplicate and continue to create more different sizes. So coffee table, so I want to make it 600, table length 600, table width 600, and just hit enter on that. Click OK, and I can see that table has updated to those particular sizes as well. So I can then change that table back to the other type that I've created as well. Hit that to that size. I can also duplicate this one, create another coffee table, and we'll call it 1000 by 1000, just so we know the size. And this just denotes next time you know exactly what size of table you're actually pulling in. So I'm going to create table height 1000. We'll make it kind of the square dimension. Hit OK on that, and that's created a third table type. So I can see in the left hand side I've created 3 table types, all of different sizes within here as well. And the similar works for creating windows as well. And just you're able to create the tabletop types within here as well, or you can do it within the family editor as well. But it's also quite easy to do it within the Revit environment as well. So that's how you create a table with flexible parameters within a Revit family furniture template. So I'm just going to show you some other examples of families here. So I'm just going to close these. I want to just open up this window file that we looked at earlier, just to show you some, when it gets into more complex families, some of the types of tools that you may use or modeling tools that you may use. So we can see here we've got a window frame within this particular view. I'm just going to jump into my window frame top view here. And you can see that the window frame here is kind of an L-shaped, it sits into our window frame, and it's been created in almost a cutout shape. And the way that was created was within using something called a sweep in the geometry creator or the geometry creation stage. So if I select, that's the glass, for example, that's my window frame, just to make sure I'm selecting the right object. So what I can do is select that piece of geometry. It's a piece of the window, the casement. I can edit that as something called a sweep. So what a sweep allows you to do is to trace an actual path of geometry. In this case, we've taken the window frame and we've created a profile using select profile. So we've loaded in a profile into this particular project, or you can sketch a profile. Sorry, this one was sketched as an L shape, so I can edit this profile if I want. Whatever way I edit that profile, it then will sweep that particular profile around that window. And you can imagine this for door frames or more complex information where you've got connecting parts that particularly need to be a certain shape for perhaps weathering or keeping out rain or that type of element as well. So just to consider how you might use different shapes that aren't necessarily squares or rectangles. You can get quite dynamic with this in terms of using different types of curves and quite more complex shapes as well. So that's using profiles and sweeps. The final thing I'm going to show you is just using visibility graphics. So to be able to control the view of a particular element within an object, you can use something called visibility graphics. So when I select, for example, just this 2D line, so this shows the opening direction of a window or a piece of glass, in this case, and this has just been created as a 2D line. It's just a symbolic line. You can see on the left-hand side here, it's been created as a line, and it's been given a category of symbol and elevation. So the purpose of these is that you can control how they appear in your Revit objects. They can still exist, but they don't have to appear in every view. So if I only want these particular lines, so I know these are my opening lines here, I just go into visibility settings and I can control at what detail levels they appear. So if you have an elevation view of a window on a facade or on a wall of a building, if it's set to coarse view, none of those lines will appear because this is unchecked, but they will appear at the medium and the fine view as well. And the purpose of this is just to allow you to control the amount of line work that you may have at a certain scale or on a certain elevation. So you can completely control how your elements look in a 2D view as well in a 3D representation as well.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Iqbal.
No worries. So I thought I'll open up on the floor. If there's any questions that anybody wants to answer, please put it in. Once answered, please put it in the Q&A box, and we can help you answer those questions. Apologies for anybody who's having connection issues with the sound. I think there were a few moments there where the sound kind of cut out. But again, with the recording, we'll be able to put that up for you clearly. All right, Jonathan, looks like you you have stunned everybody with your webinar there. Nobody's got any questions.
Perfect.
All right.
If anybody wants to have follow-up questions, just email the support at cadpoint.co.uk and we'll be happy to get back to you there as well.
That's right. Well, I've got a question from Lloyd here. I'm having problems with angled parameters. Can you set an angle parameter to rotate around a specified point?
Yeah, that sounds quite achievable. I'd have to see the context of exactly what you're trying to model. If you wanted to email us maybe a bit of a, if it's a screenshot or the type of object you're trying to rotate, we'll be able to maybe give you a more specific answer on that as well. But it does sound possible that you can create or set an angle parameter to rotate around a specified point, yes.
Okay, perfect. I've got a question here from Lee West. Are there external site families in the drop-down list?
Are there external site families in the drop-down list?
I imagine, is there any more families other than what's in the drop-down list?
Oh yes, so everything. So Revit comes installed with proprietary families, but you can download families. There are quite a lot of websites that make custom families and things. You can go to the NBS website, and they do a lot of manufacturer families as well, such as Kingspan and Nordan Windows, and a lot of the big name guys as well for those type of objects.
All right, perfect. Was that your answer to your question, Lee, or was there something else on that one? Also, we have how do you label a family that shows on plan view?
How do you label a family that shows in plan view? It depends what type of label. So if you're using a multi-category tag, for example, you could do that in plan view if you want to pull up the name of the material or a particular parameter that's contained in that family, you could use a multi-category tag.
Okay, perfect. So we had Lee was just coming back to us about that. So when you meant by external site families, like landscaping items, etc., is there any more in the drop-down list? So like to do with landscaping, I'd imagine outside trees, furnishings, etc.
Yes, in terms of planting,
Bushes,
there's
etc.
quite a lot of content in there. There's if you go into the folder structure, if you go into it through Windows Explorer, you can actually see the thumbnails for different ones. And there's a folder called I think Site and Entourage as well, and you get a lot of content in there. There's street furniture, you know, bicycle barriers and bicycle lock devices, bins and street lamps and stuff like that in the Revit library. But if you go in through Windows Explorer, you can see the thumbnail of what the object is.
Okay, perfect. Looks like we have more questions here. I think if any other questions, please send it to CADpoint, support@cadpoint.co.uk. I think we're probably going to end it there. Thank you very much for joining us today, and everybody stay safe and stay well. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Bye now.
Iqbal.